What is the most horrifying unsolved case you have heard about? Where is Jose Corona, the suspected man who decapitated his wife with a chainsaw and was never seen again? The tragic murder of Maria Corona in Louisville, Texas, remains one of the most gruesome domestic violence cases in recent history. Her brutal death, caused by a chainsaw attack, shocked the local community. Despite extensive investigations, her then 49-year-old husband, Jose Fernando Corona, remains at large. Almost 15 years ago, on April the 26th, 2010, emergency dispatchers received a harrowing call from a postal carrier, Jeremiah Gonzalez, running his routes on the 1,000 block of Shadowwood Lane. Gonzalez described that a body was lying in the street with a blue sheet covering the bottom half of the body, and that it's bleeding. It's decapitated. The body belonged to Maria Corona, 44, mother of 6. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner released autopsy results reporting that Maria Corona was alive when she was decapitated. The cause of death was multiple chainsaw injuries due to assault by another person. Gonzalez reported that a man was near the Corona home, but by the time he got up close to where he had seen him, the man had disappeared and a chainsaw was left on the tailgate of a pickup truck. The chainsaw had been duct taped to remain continuously running, ensuring the deadly attack could not be interrupted. Gonzalez also reported that the chainsaw had blood on it, along with seeing a trail of blood and hair from the entrance of the Corona home, through the front lawn, and onto where Maria Coronas' body laid. Seconds after police arrived to the scene, Maria's daughter Carla Corona returned home. Upon seeing her mother's body, she lets out an agonizing scream. Apparently, Jose Corona had called Freddie Arellano, Carla Corona's husband, and had claimed, "I did it. I killed her," and that he was going to drag her body next door. Police then swarmed the scene and started investigating. Upon entering the home, they found several items related to the occult, including tarot cards, vials with a red substance assumed to be some sort of perfume or potion, bags of herbs, and a book titled Poderosas Recetas de Alta Magia, Powerful High Magic Recipes, along with other items. It is believed that Jose was consulting with a curandera, a witch doctor, to ward off bad spirits and energy. While investigators found occult-related items, no direct link between these and the murder was established, and police have no evidence that La Curandera advised him to murder Maria. Jose was reportedly very controlling and abusive towards Maria, also having suspicions that Maria may have been having an affair with a family friend. But no evidence or claims of Maria being unfaithful have been proven. Family members testified that Jose had experienced mental breakdowns in the weeks leading up to the murder. It is said that Jose was preparing for the murder the night before. His son had heard him starting up chainsaws at midnight, something he found strange considering the time. Police say, the morning after, Maria was on the phone with one of her friends just before the murder, and her friend could hear loud noises in the background. She told her friend, "I think Jose is out in the yard making noise with some sort of lawn equipment," then got off the phone and went outside, apparently to see what was happening. And that's when police say Jose attacked his wife with a chainsaw. After attacking Maria, Jose fled the scene in a 2005 Toyota Sequoia. That vehicle was later found abandoned in Bedford, a Dallas-Fort Worth suburb. It seems that after abandoning the vehicle, he was captured on surveillance video at a Walmart. He bought clothes and other items. Then he makes a phone call to an unidentified person and withdrew money from an ATM in preparation for going on the run. Shortly after, a person, presumably the same one he spoke to, arrived in a Toyota-like pickup truck and picked him up from Walmart. later to be dropped off at a car dealership. At the dealership, he requested to take a gold-colored 1991 Ford Ranger pickup truck under the pretense of wanting to test drive it, leaving his driver's license as collateral. Ultimately, he steals the vehicle. He is last seen driving through a toll booth in Laredo, Texas, headed towards Mexico. There is speculation that Corona fled to Mexico, but according to authorities, the stolen Ranger never crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, so it is possible that Corona may have walked across the border. He might possibly be in Laredo. Corona has extended family members in Euless, Grapevine, Mineola, Austin, and Houston, Texas, as well as in Oklahoma, Washington, and Mexico. Jose Fernando Corona is a Hispanic male, 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing between 165 to 175 pounds, with brown eyes and black hair. As of March 26, 2025, Jose Fernando Corona, now 64 years old, remains at large. He is wanted by the Louisville Police Department, the Dallas Police Department, the U.S. Marshals, and the Texas Rangers. 2 young men were killed in separate incidents during the Notting Hill Carnival in London. Despite the huge crowds and heavy police presence, both murders remain unsolved since 2000. Notting Hill Carnival is a vibrant annual street festival in London that celebrates Caribbean culture, featuring parades, music, dancing, and food, and is one of the largest street festivals in Europe. Abdul Bhatti and his family had moved to West London from Wolverhampton in 1996. Abdul was described as a caring young man with a passion for football, loved by those who knew him. On August the 28th, 2000, he attended the Notting Hill Carnival with friends, enjoying the vibrant atmosphere near stalls run by the South Asian community. As the carnival began winding down around 7:30 p.m., chaos erupted when a gang of up to 50 youths rampaged through the crowded streets. In what police called steaming, the gang tore through groups of unsuspecting carnival-goers, robbing and attacking them indiscriminately. Abdul and his friends were targeted when one of the gang members tried to steal a gold chain from Abdul's friend. Abdul intervened to protect his friend, but the gang turned on him instead. In an act of brutal violence, the 50-strong group punched and kicked Abdul mercilessly. Witnesses reported that as Abdul tried to crawl away, one gang member delivered a sickening running blow to his head before the group fled. Abdul was rushed to the hospital, but tragically died the next day from devastating brainstem injuries. The attack, which unfolded on the streets of the carnival, was partially caught on CCTV, but the specific assault on Abdul was not captured. No police officers were present at the scene during the attack. London's chief inspector condemned the gang's totally indiscriminate violence and suggested that Abdul's murder may have had a racial motivation, as none of the Caribbean-run stalls were targeted during the rampage. Abdul's family, while acknowledging this possibility, focused on the senseless criminality of the act. His brother-in-law told the media, "At the end of the day, it's criminals and mindless thugs, intent on mayhem and robbery. That's the overwhelming fact here." In the months following the carnival, police arrested over 200 people for various crimes committed during the event, including petty thefts and assaults. Many suspects were linked to the gang calling themselves the Hackney Posse, which operated out of Hackney, more than 10 miles away from West London. Despite efforts, police were unable to gather sufficient evidence to charge anyone with Abdul's murder. 9 men from the gang were convicted of violent disorder and sentenced to up to 21 months in prison, a sentence that left Abdul's family devastated. They believed some or all of these men were directly involved in the attack, but were disheartened by the lack of justice for Abdul. More than 2 decades later, no one has been charged with Abdul Badi's murder. On the same tragic day, just 2 hours after Abdul's death, 21-year-old Greg Watson became another victim of the chaos. Greg, a delivery man and a young father to a month-old baby daughter, had attended the carnival with his partner and friends. As the group followed one of the final floats on their way home, they encountered a group of young men harassing and grabbing girls in the crowd. When one of the men began pestering a girl in Greg's group, he calmly intervened to defuse the situation. Greg's actions were non-confrontational, but one of the men, described as hooded and muscular, responded with shocking violence. He handed an item to another person before rushing at Greg and stabbing him in the abdomen with a long kitchen knife he had hidden in his jeans. As Greg collapsed, a girl nearby screamed, "You stabbed him!" To which the attacker coldly replied, "So what?" Greg Watson died from his injuries despite calling out for help. The entire attack was caught on CCTV, and Greg's partner allowed the footage to be aired on Crime Watch in the hope of catching his killer. Police quickly identified a suspect, Sean Safinis, who was arrested after being found hiding in a wardrobe. Despite initial hopes for justice, the case against Safinis fell apart during the trial. The prosecution relied on a single witness who admitted to identifying Safinis after watching the CCTV footage and confessed to not having seen the stabbing itself. Additionally, none of the 12 people in the identification parade could conclusively identify Safinis as the attacker. The judge dismissed the case, instructing the jury to find Safinis not guilty due to a lack of reliable evidence. He walked free, though he would later face multiple arrests for other crimes over the next 20 years. The failure to convict Safinis left Greg's family without justice, and his murder remains unsolved to this day. More than 20 years later, the families of Abdul and Greg are still waiting for answers. Their stories are a stark reminder of how negligence and violence can shatter lives, and how justice delayed often feels like justice denied. An 18-year-old tourist would have a mental breakdown while abroad. She talked about feeling as if she was being spied on and said, "People are looking at me like I'm crazy, hooker." She would later be found dead on a beach. Her killer held her head under the sand until she suffocated. Celia Andrea Trindler was born on April 16, 1982, in Affoltern am Albis, Switzerland. Her upbringing was a rather tragic one, and when she lived in a small Swiss village of only 600 people named Rifferswil, near Zurich. She lived in Rifferswil with her younger brother, and it was there that she had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor when she was between the ages of 6 and 8. Her parents aided in covering it up so it wouldn't lead to a scandal. She had even been committed to a psychiatric hospital around the age of 16 to 17. Because of this, she grew up to be reserved, and she constantly seemed sad and never found herself in a relationship. As she grew into her teenage years, she grew to resent her parents, who stood by their decision and kept demanding that she remain silent about her abuse back in Rifferswil. Her household was no stranger to fierce arguments. On July the 24th, 2000, her family decided to go on a vacation and arrived at a campsite in Carcans. Carcans was a small beachside commune on the coast of France's Gironde department. Their vacation was due to last 5 days, with Celia and her family set to return to Switzerland on August 5th. They had vacationed here 2 times before, but Celia didn't want to go this time. It was said that the vacation was organized against her will. Celia stayed with her family in a tent on the campsite, one she shared with her parents and 13-year-old brother. she didn't enjoy France much on her own and couldn't speak with the other campers. While Celia was from Switzerland, she was specifically from the German region and only spoke German, so she couldn't communicate with any of the local campers or the ones who learned French before arriving. However, a different reason caused Celia's enjoyment of their vacation to evaporate. On August 3rd, 2000, 2 days before they were scheduled to return to Switzerland, she was on a bike ride with her father and said, "I'm happy to be with you, because I feel spied on." The family then went to the beach, where Celia finally made some temporary friends. When she returned to the tent that afternoon, she angrily threw a water bottle full of sand to the ground and screamed. When her father asked what was wrong, Celia replied, "You know what's wrong with me." On the morning of August 4th, after going to the beach early in the morning, she refused to speak with her father upon her return and told him to leave her alone. After lunch, she stayed in the tent alone and cried. Afterward, she went to the beach and spent the afternoon with some students from Paris. The students said that Celia was acting off and would cry to herself, but they couldn't understand the issue due to the language barrier. Later at the beach, she also complained that people are looking at me like I'm crazy. Then, in the evening, she insisted on taking down the tent and having the entire family move back to Switzerland a full day early. While at the campsite, she confided in her brother that she saw 2 young Frenchmen in their 20s who had been shooting suggestive glances her way. At 6 p.m., she was seen by the campsite's caretaker alongside the caretaker's brother. According to her, she went through the family's tent to find the keys to the bicycle locker. When she couldn't find them, she opted to leave the campsite on foot. At 7:15 p.m., a couple of tourists from Germany saw her on the dune line separating Karkens from Lake Horton. According to them, they saw her writing in the sand with a piece of wood. They also described her as looking dreamy. This took place over 2 kilometers from the campsite. She never returned to the campsite. At midnight on August 5th, Celia's parents alerted the campsite's night watchman of her disappearance, but the local police didn't hear the report until 2 a.m. They did patrols around the area, but finding any trace of Celia, especially among all the other tourists, proved difficult. Lifeguards dived into the oceans, firefighters searched together with the police with search dogs, and even a helicopter was called in for a brief period in which Celia was just a missing person. The helicopter flew over the ocean as Celia's parents told them about her history with chronic depression and the fact that she had been on antidepressants, and they feared that she had committed suicide by jumping into the ocean. After 2 hours, the police found a pair of red Adidas sneakers with the laces tied and pointing toward the ocean. The sneakers were found at the foot of the dune. Inside, one of them was a ring. The ring and the sneakers belonged to Celia. The police also found a 3/4 empty bottle of mineral water resting in front of the footwear. Meanwhile, Celia's father found 4 pine cones arranged in a circle on the beach, surrounding a seagull feather stuck in the sand. What connection, if any, this has to the case is unknown, but he felt it worth mentioning as Celia liked seagulls. At 1:30 p.m., a Dutch tourist on the first day of his vacation was walking along the beach when they suddenly found a dead body in the middle of the dunes of Karkens Plage. The body was that of a young woman lying on her back. She was partially buried in the sand, an SFW recreation of the crime scene, wearing a black polo shirt, a brown skirt, and a red swimsuit top. Meanwhile, her swimming trunks had been placed over her face. The body belonged to Celia Trindler. She was found 2 kilometers away from the campsite. The police arrived and searched and scoured the beach for additional evidence. Only a few meters away, the police found Bob Marley. They also saw just the letters H-E, as the wind had disrupted the rest of the message. The handwriting was recognized as Celia's, and the police thought they spelled out H-E-L-P. Celia's mother instead said it likely was meant to say Hex, the German word for witch. This is likely what the German tourists saw her writing. The case was obviously a murder, but the autopsy revealed a truly horrific cause of death. The coroner labeled the cause of death as suffocation. Presents had been applied to her neck, and a large quantity of sand was found in her airways. Breathing would have been rendered impossible. Meanwhile, no other injuries were found on her, which led the medical examiner to conclude that Celia had her face forced against the sand until it caused her to suffocate. Even though Celia had sustained 0 superficial injuries, the same likely wasn't true of her killer. Celia had fiercely defended herself, and fragments of skin were discovered under her nails. DNA was taken from the skin samples, which gave them a partial sample belonging to a man. There were also signs that Celia had sex recently, but the coroner believed it to be consensual because of the lack of violence, marks, or lesions. Sperm was found in the sand, and police took a partial sample from the sperm as well, but it was degraded from being mixed in with the sand. Her time of death was anywhere between the late night of August 4th and the early morning of August 5th. There were also signs that her body had been moved post-mortem, likely to be buried before the killer changed his mind. Karkens had a local population of just 2,415, so taking DNA from the local adult male population would make solving the case relatively easy. But as mentioned, it was camping season, and Celia's family weren't the only ones in attendance. Many tourists, both foreign nationals and from other parts of France, found themselves at Karkens at the time of the murder. Many of them may have already returned home. The case became their #1 priority, and they got to work almost immediately. The police identified over 40,000 tourists staying in Karkens at the time, increasing the suspect pool dramatically. Most of the tourists hailed from Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and other parts of France itself. That being said, most of them didn't recognize Celia when shown a picture of her. The German tourists who last saw her also told police another thing. They saw a young man carrying a bag over his shoulder appear out of the forest a few meters lower than Celia in elevation. The man was said to have climbed the dune, and upon reaching the summit, turned towards Celia, who was crouching at the time. He stared at her for a long time, according to the witnesses. From the look he gave her, it was as if he were seeing her for the first time. Other witnesses talked about a peeping Tom who stalked the campground's toilets and who would open other people's tents in the middle of the night. Both were ruled out. Another aspect that made solving the case difficult was the fact that Celia had a remarkably similar look-alike also vacationing in Karkens. Many people would report seeing Celia before and even after the murder because they mistook her for Celia. That being said, they weren't too forthcoming. They felt as if the French police were mistreating them for pressing them with intimate questions. Next, 50 gendarmes from the Bordeaux research section combed not just Karkens, but the entire region Karkens was situated, and even the surrounding regions. As the police had feared, many of the tourists in the area had already left, so tracking them down and obtaining their DNA would be a very tall order. Next, the police read through Celia's to see if she wrote about any potential suspects. The diary was mostly a write-off with nothing of note, Well, not entirely. She mentioned that she was a fan of reggae, which would explain Bob Marley's name written on the sand. There was a reggae sun ska concert planned in the nearby community of Montalivet. The concert was canceled, and while the police did follow up on the concert, there was no evidence that Celia was ever in Montalivet. The police also looked into all the campers who were still present, tracked down as many hitchhikers near the beach and campsite as they could find, and interviewed the regulars at the nearest bar to the beach. The local sex offenders were also rounded up and compelled to give up DNA samples. Within the first month of the investigation alone, 5,000 DNA tests were conducted, but none were a match. In March 2001, another witness, a firefighter, came forward. He was vacationing in car cabs at the beginning of August 2000. He left sometime between August 5th, August 6th, and hadn't heard of the murder at the time, which is why he didn't come forward. He only came forward now as a result of the flyers and notices that police had put up. At 7 p.m. on August 4th, he saw what he described as a slender, athletic young man, wearing a t-shirt and Bermuda shorts with vertical blue and yellow stripes. The man, he said, was a Creole or West Indian descent. He was between the ages of 20 to 25 and had dyed blonde hair. Celia seemed sad as he took her by the arm and left for the beach. On May 3rd, a composite sketch was made of this man and distributed to all police and gendarmerie stations in southwest France, as well as local shopkeepers. On December 3rd, 2001, the police in Aveyron were operating a checkpoint when one man refused to cooperate. His refusal was so strong that he actually exited his vehicle and attacked the officers. The man was placed under arrest and identified as a 23-year-old Moroccan national. The Moroccan resembled the man in the sketch, so his DNA was taken and compared to the samples found underneath Celia's fingernails. The results were not a match. The owner of a surfing equipment store and a cook from a hotel in Carkins also bore a resemblance to the man in the sketch. The man was questioned, but he had a very solid alibi. Their next suspect, though, came to the police's attention right as he committed a separate murder himself. On December 4th, 2001, a 10-year-old boy from Morocco named Larbi Fanous failed to return home from school in the north of Bordeaux. He went missing until December 19th, when his body was found behind a garbage bin. Larbi had been naked, covered with planks, cardboard, and household waste. The cause of death was asphyxiation. The police arrested Alain Diaz, who had a history of sex crimes against minors. Alain was known to frequent Carkins when he went on vacation, so the police decided to test his DNA against the sample found on Celia's fingernails. It turned out not to be a match. Alain would later get a life sentence for the murder of Larbi. In the ensuing years, the police would constantly re-enter the DNA sample into FNAEG, France's DNA database, in case it matched any new additions, but would always come up empty. Next, because a large population of the suspect pool were likely foreign tourists, the samples were also sent to 40 other countries to be checked against their databases. They, too, turned up no matches. It seems the killer never claimed another victim, or at least didn't leave any DNA behind at the crime scene. This notion would be tested when an eerily similar murder occurred almost exactly 3 years to the day. It was so similar that the police in Carkins were certain that he had struck again. On August 6th, 2003, on the island of Saint-Martin-de-Ré in the Charente-Maritime department, a 16-year-old girl named Audrey Texier had been helping her father, an oyster farmer, sell oysters at the local market. At 1 p.m., she left the market so she could go home and have lunch with her mother. She never returned. Audrey's mother grew worried when she didn't return and set out to look for her. Not long after, she found her daughter's half-naked body lying on the beach. She had been raped and asphyxiated with a cloth stuffed in her mouth. Both Audrey and Celia were teenage girls. They went missing after leaving their families. Both were murdered in small resort towns. Both had been suffocated, and both were raped. Or Celia had consensual sex, if the medical examiner had a way to tell. Their bodies were both found on beaches. Both had some clothing removed, and both died basically on the same day. The similarities were plain to see. Saint-Martin-de-Ré was also located only 160 kilometers from Carquins. Another unfortunate similarity it bore to Celia's case was how it seemed to be well on its way to going unsolved. A witness was living only 150 meters away from where Audrey's body was found, but they hadn't heard anything. Dozens of police officers combed the surrounding area and Audrey's route for any evidence. A composite sketch was made based on 3 witnesses, which prompted several hundred calls, none of them panning out. 100 DNA samples, and Saint-Martin-de-Ré's local population of just 2,309 ballooned to 150,000, mostly tourists who could come and go as they pleased. The case remained unsolved until 24-year-old seasonal worker Frédéric Ramette was arrested on December 27th. Frédéric was one of the suspects initially looked into back in August, but nothing implicated him, so he was let go. But after the police found an unidentified fingerprint that had been overlooked and muddied, the investigation was reopened. This led police back to Frédéric only this time, with enough evidence to compel a DNA sample from him. The sample matched the DNA left behind when Audrey was raped. When the police in Carquins heard of Frédéric's arrest, they dispatched some of their own officers to Saint-Martin-de-Ré to compare his DNA to that found under Celia's nails. And the result was not a match. The case wasn't even a copycat killing. It wasn't even a copycat. All the similarities to Celia's case were merely coincidence. Frédéric was handed down a sentence of 30 years imprisonment. With that, Celia's case went cold once again. In 2011, the Creole man in the composite sketch was finally identified. He was a surfing enthusiast from the Overseas Department of Réunion who had decided to spend his 2000 holiday in mainland France. The man was ruled out. His DNA also was not a match. In January 2012, the police reopened the case. This time, they dispatched a team of investigators to the Swiss village of Rifferswil so they could question those who personally knew Celia. Her friends, classmates, teachers, and other relatives who did not accompany them across the border to France. This was only made possible because of the assistance of the Swiss police, who joined in with the questioning. Between 2001 and 2015, Celia's family would refuse to speak to French investigators in any capacity. It was here that the police learned of Celia's sexual assault for the first time, the one her parents covered up. One source even said her mother imposed a code of silence on her daughter. Eventually, her family did identify the rapist as a local pharmacist. While the French police couldn't arrest him for that crime, as it happened in Switzerland, they could still take his DNA. It wasn't a match. According to the locals, Celia's mother was the mistress of the guru of a local sect, one of multiple mistresses, in fact, and she was a loyal member. There were also many rumors, although I don't know how truthful they are, that Celia's father engaged in many acts of incest. Her father and the sect leader were never serious suspects, but to put an end to the rumors, The police compelled them to surrender their DNA, regardless. The samples were not a match. The police then went to Germany and the Netherlands to speak to some young tourists who had been in Karkens during August 2000. In fact, the local police themselves invited the French police over. Their DNA also didn't match the sample they had on hand. In 2014, the police put out a public appeal asking for more witnesses to come forward. They received no response. On a hunch, the police also compared the DNA against two serial killers, Francis Héolme and Michel Fourniret. The DNA cleared them of this murder in particular. In 2017, the police revisited the evidence and managed to extract a complete sample from the sperm. They also decided to do familial DNA testing to find someone related to the killer. The samples still didn't match. Over 985 people were identified as persons of interest, with over 70 singled out for a more rigorous investigation, but all of them were later cleared as well. When all was said and done throughout the case's entire lifespan, 20,000 were questioned, and 5,700 DNA tests were carried out, but no arrests of any kind. In April 2023, the investigation was transferred to the Nanterre Cold Case Unit, but as of yet, they've made no new breakthroughs. Death and disappearance. The mystery of Diane and Hugh. Harlan. Hugh and Diane Harlan. This couple, married for 10 years, lived a somewhat unconventional life in the picturesque fishing town of Morro Bay, California. Hugh was a native of Morro Bay, born July 31st, 1935. Diane Eakes was born in San Francisco on November 22nd, 1938. It would be fair to call this couple eccentric. One commenter said they were like 60s hippies who never stopped being hippies. Hugh eked out a living by fishing and selling fish in town, supplemented by doing odd jobs. His philosophy was to work when he wanted. Sometimes he would put in hours of labor helping others and wouldn't take any pay. For that reason, money was tight in the Harlan household. Another reason for money being tight was Diane Harlan's spending habits. Diane was a dog lover, known in town as the Dog Lady. She was a regular fixture in town, wearing old clothes and always seen walking her dogs. The landlady where they lived called her mysterious. Hugh was frustrated that Diane would spend the money he gave her on the dogs, and was too generous with friends and even strangers. The Unsolved Mysteries episode repeated a claim that she had been known to give Hugh dog food for dinner, once baked in a casserole. The two argued, sometimes publicly. In 1982, they had been living on a ranch rent-free for 4 years. On the evening of October 2nd, Diane was taking her dogs, Totu and Charity, for the customary walk. She was seen around 6:15 p.m. near Morro Bay High School. That was the last time anyone saw her. The dogs were seen running from near the beach about an hour later, without Diane. Hugh said they came home about 11 p.m., but no Diane. The owner of the ranch where they lived urged him to call the police, but he wasn't concerned, saying that it wasn't unusual for Diane to go off. On October 13th, a woman who was attending a cross-country meet at the high school stepped out and saw something on the beach under some cypress trees. It was the body of a woman, partially clothed, with a dog leash around her neck. Police determined that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. She could not be identified because of decomposition, so police put out a description. Hugh called them and was able to identify her as Diane by 2 bracelets that were lying near the body. Fingerprints confirmed it. Police estimated that Diane had been strangled sometime before 7 p.m. on October 2nd. Hugh was questioned about why he hadn't reported Diane missing. He explained that she did sometimes leave for periods of time. They asked when the dogs had come back and if they were wearing their leashes. Hugh said yes. Then they showed him the leash that had been used to murder Diane. Hugh changed his story. The dogs had come back without leashes. Then he asked for a lawyer and would not talk anymore. The changing story made police wary. However, by October 19th, they were saying publicly that they had no suspects, and that Hugh was not a suspect. Hugh seems not to have been grateful. He stated that it brought disgrace and was kind of sick for Diane's death to be classified as a homicide. He claimed that she died from an aneurysm for which she was being treated, that she sometimes forgot to take her medicine. He had consulted an astrologist who had resolved any suspicion of foul play for him. He had some other interesting comments. Hugh said when Deanne was gone, he first thought she went to Colorado with friends, but the friends came back a few days later. Then he thought she might have visited her Swami in Orange County, because her Afghan Ratzel had died, and she thought that was significant. He said Diane could predict the future. She had a dream that if anything happened to Ratzel, she was also going to die soon. Police tried to see if there were ties to any other murders in the area. They even questioned notorious confessed murderer Henry Lee Lucas. He had an alibi, being far away. Later, police did have a suspect for Diane's murder, but not a lot of evidence. The suspect's lawyer told them to arrest him or leave him alone. They brought a case to the district attorney, but the DA didn't bring charges. Since then, the case has gone cold. In 1985, police said it was not being actively investigated, though it was periodically reviewed. A memorial service for Diane was held at United Presbyterian Church in Morro Bay, somewhat oddly, as she practiced a form of Buddhism. Hugh went on with life much as he had done before. Some people in town thought he had killed Diane, but police had stopped regarding him as a suspect, probably when they zeroed in on the person they couldn't charge. Years went by, and in 1986, Hugh picked up a 2-day construction job in San Simeon, about 27 miles north from Morro Bay. He borrowed some tools from a friend and headed out. He completed the work and was on his way back to Morro Bay, last seen leaving San Simeon on November 1st at about 1:30 p.m. The next day, his friend whose tools he borrowed spotted Hugh's blue 1967 Chevrolet utility bed pickup truck parked on the side of Highway 1, just north of Burton Street near Cambria. The truck was facing north. The hood was up, the doors were locked, and Hugh's glasses, sleeping bag, backpack, tools, tobacco tins, and lunch were in the car. There was no sign of Hugh. His car keys were found in the grass a few feet away. The fuel line had been removed from the car, suggesting that Hugh had walked away to look for help. Hugh was reported missing on November 4th, and a search began, expanding on November 8th. Local papers carried missing notices. Nothing was found. The police thought that he was dead, either from an accident or medical event while trying to find help. A former Morro Bay detective thought it was foul play. He had a lot of friends and a lot of enemies. I think someone has taken care of him. There was also a theory that he might have left to get away from things. He had gone on absences before, and was a survivalist who could live off the land for a long time. Anyway, Hugh Harlan has never been seen again, nor have remains been found.